On the 19th of March, 2006, an estimated 63 people living in a community on the Kentworth farm were discovered dead, considered one of the worst mass suicides in recent history. The events described so far have eluded significant press attention. Listed here are several interviews with various figures associated with the discovery of the scene and what was found within the Kentworth compound. The first interviewee is Andrew Willard, a tall man with large hands, standing 6'4" and rakishly thin. His almond-colored eyes look out at me from beneath a low-set furrowed brow with a mix of curiosity and concern. He has been in my office for 15 minutes and has asked to smoke 3 times. Each time I say no, Mr. Willard holds a cigarette between his 2 fingers anyway, tapping it against my desk and leaving a trail of tobacco crumbs. And as soon as my equipment is set up, I ask Mr. Willard to begin his account for the recording. What follows is the resultant transcript.
I was around 30 when the Rollins moved in just off the Kentworth land. There were just a few of them back then. Squatters or gypsies, we figured most likely. We didn't much care so long as they weren't settling in on any of our property. Sometimes you'd see the youngest one coming into town to pick a few things up. Well, she was a rowdy-looking thing with dead teeth and raggedy hair. She didn't act much like any gypsy I'd seen. She was quiet and kept to herself. And I remember looking at her and thinking that she might have been a pretty thing in another life. There's always gossip, but I paid no mind. We didn't know nothing about them, and so it might as well have all been fiction. Davies told me he saw signs of construction on the land, and a passing solicitor let slip that the Rollins were the new owners, and he'd been sent in to work on planning permission. He was a real slick bugger. The first hint that any of us got that the Rollins were rich. Of course, over time, all that faded into the background. I didn't much like them, though. I always felt a kind of pity if I saw one of them wandering around town. Mostly, I just didn't trust them. Didn't trust their choice of home or why they live such lonely lives. If you act all secretive, it's only natural people figure you got secrets. Of course, I didn't have a damn clue just how bad it was. They'd been living up there close to 20 years when the car came rolling towards my end of the road. I could hear it coming from a mile off, drumming its burst tires against the tarmac while the bumper screeched something awful from halfway under the radiator. I remember just thinking that something horrific had happened. That sound worked its way under my skin like nails on a chalkboard. I didn't know what it was, just that it was bad and coming my way. It came to a stop just outside my house. And it was the strangest thing. Like someone had tapped the brakes at just the right time to get my attention. I tried telling the police who came that the handbrake was on when I reached it. And that was a pretty damn odd thing to notice. They didn't seem to think so. And I spent a long time since wondering if maybe I pulled it up without thinking. God knows I don't remember too much of what I saw in that thing. At least, not in an easygoing way. And it's still in there, rattling around in my head. What I saw, smelled, and heard. I feel it when I sleep. Or sometimes even when I just close my eyes. I'll be sitting there and I'll blink for half a second too long and poof. All I can see is those 3 girls sat next to each other, all naked and cut up. And I hear those blue bottles crawling around their belly buttons. And I can smell the mess they made in fear and the smell in their muscles turn into mush, a fat curdling beneath their skin. The car came howling out of the woods with a little piece of hell trapped inside, and I had the misfortune of seeing it. And I think about it every day, every night. I think about that handbrake pulled up right. I think about the gentle curve of the road. I wonder if the car really can roll on that distance on its own. And I think about those girls. I think about them a lot. I guess I can't help but wonder what they went through. Why they soiled themselves. Why their mascara was all run from crying. And most importantly, why they was grinning from ear to ear. Jesus. Is it okay if I smoke? No.
Dr. Alsey is a sad-looking man in his 60s. He has spent the last few years battling an addiction to prescription medication and retired 6 months ago in order to avoid being stuck off as a medical practitioner. We met for coffee at a small restaurant just a few hundred feet from the rehabilitation clinic where he has lived for the last 10 weeks. He has gray hooded eyes, with a chubby face and stubby fingers that are constantly scratching his jaw, neck, and as well as his shoulders.
Ain't no one interviewed me before. All the time I was just a student, not a doctor or coroner or anyone else most people think to ask at times like that. I was still there. I was there in the minibus as we drove past the creaky chain link fences and the corrugated iron shacks. I stood on the grounds and I looked up at the amber windowed spire of the Kentworth Manor house. I observed the smashed up garage cans with still burning fires and saw rats the size of cats scurry away between piles of trash lying sparsely across the muddy grassless yard. And right outside the front house were 13 bodies all lined up in neat little rows. They busted some of us in to help with the cleanup, and we went on to find another 38 bodies hidden inside the main house. And even in the middle of a full-blown investigation, everyone was just silent. The cops, the doctors, even the paramedics. I mean, you can expect it maybe from a bunch of final-year med students, but not those guys, right? They're in the thick of it every day. But no one joked or gossiped. There was only ever curt nods and tense orders delivered in breathless snippets. Now, I won't go in as far as to say my time spent with the Rollins is what led to where I am, but it didn't help. There were 5 of us, but they built that place up something stupid. They'd added 2 new floors and probably around 45 rooms via various annexes. And that's not counting the shitty little porta cabins that had just been set up as classrooms or dormitories and so on. There's dozens of them. It took days to clear in room by room for bodies just to make sure, and the whole time I was there, right in the thick of it. And the bodies, they were all fucking smiling. I asked about it and I hoped that I'd get some kind of dismissive, oh, it doesn't matter, just do your job. It's just rigor mortis. But the guy that I asked just shook his head and put his hand on my shoulder, and that felt worse somehow. Like no one ever had any answers. No one could comfort me or tell me to just get over it. I wanted to be told my fear wasn't valid, but no one could do that. And all those bodies had been cut up awful. Some hiding in terror and others lying down as if going for a nap. The official verdict was poison or some kind of hallucinogenic episode, but just about everyone I saw was cut up in some real nasty ways. There were strips of flayed skin, nucleated eyeballs, and scalps hanging off like the lid of a bin. One woman had cut her throat so deep that she practically decapitated herself. And for others, it wasn't so clear if they'd hurt themselves or if someone else had done it. It was clear a lot of them had been trying to escape something or someone, but I can't quite imagine how a random attacker could clear out a building or so many people without being overpowered. The Rollins family weren't naive. They had some big guys hanging around who weren't exactly defenseless. In the first couple of days, there were all these people around, but once they figured out how long the job was going to take, they soon found a way to make themselves scarce, you know. There were times that we'd be left alone in that place, and I'm not sure that I had a good night's sleep since. The worst that I had it was when we were still clearing out one of the main assembly halls right at the start. There were 23 bodies in there, and me and my friend had to move them out and start on cleanup. And at some point towards the end of the day, my friend popped off to the toilet, and I was left alone with each and every one of those bodies. It doesn't really help that most of them had been bagged up. If anything, I found it worse. I started to get these images in my head of one of them sitting upright, real slow, like a vampire in those old horror films, except there was nothing cheap and low budget about the picture in my mind. Somewhere on the wall up ahead, the clock was ticking. The kind of thing that you have in a classroom. And I took in the lectern and the benches and folded up ping pong table in one corner. It was a place where people lived. God knows what they were doing, but they were still just living. Really. The guy that I was zipping up, the guy with bloodshot eyes that wouldn't stay closed and blue puffy lips with the tongue half chewed firmly between his teeth. He'd once sat on one of those benches and stared at the clock. And something about that just scares the hell out of me. I decided to leave, to go find someone. Anyone. God, they'd understand, wouldn't they? They'd understand why a young guy like me could get a little spooked. I stood up and I started making my way to the door when I heard it. I didn't even look back. I couldn't. I just fucking ran, and I gave a little shriek too. Something to leave behind me as I sprinted past the threshold like someone stuck me with a jolt of lightning. My muscles bunched tight like springs, and my scalp turned ice cold, and it seemed to shrink around my skull, and all I could think was that things like this shouldn't happen. I'd got spooked. That's all. That's why I wanted to leave. It was a feeling, not something real. And sure, the image of one of those bags sitting upright had been playing over and over in my mind for the last few minutes, but I was just aching to joke. It was a fantasy, a game that I played with myself. It wasn't meant to be real. It wasn't meant to be anything but a thought. But I heard it. So damn loud and clear, I could have sworn the clock held its breath just to make sure that I noticed. I started to shuffle, audible somewhere behind me. A noise that seamlessly turned into the crumpling of plastic, followed by the skin-crawling sound of a zipper being drawn.
Mr. Allswell is built like a linebacker and struggles to fit into the chair that I placed in front of my desk. He's wearing a tailored suit, tan with a fine-stretched herringbone pattern. He asked to compare watches, but I declined and instead asked him to recount verbally what he had previously discussed over the phone. Apparently chastened, he agrees.
We recovered a whole boatload of documents. Most of it was mundane stuff. Accounting stuff related to the dodgy shit that he got into. He liked to gamble, horses and stocks. And apparently he had a hell of a system because it paid for most of what he got. Some of the other stuff that we pulled was a little more spooky. The kind of thing that you might expect from a place where 50 people off themselves. I'm talking about weird drawings, manifestos, ranting about purity and blood, weird symbols, you know. I figured that it was all gibberish. Cults are all pyramid schemes. They're about filling you up with hot air, just throwing words out there like some professor hoping to get laid. Doesn't mean nothing. I got a stripper friend, right? She tells me the funniest fucking thing. Every day these men come in, and she works just off an airport, so this place sees a good amount of foot traffic. And they come in paying her cash to see her tits. And these guys, these fucking guys, lie to her. She asks what they do, who they are, and they all lie. One told her that he was a fighter pilot for the RAF. One said they work for MI6. One said an oil baron whose best friends was Easy, and did they mention? One was a black belt in Krav Maga. Now, I'm just saying, that was all bullshit. It wasn't about nothing except chase and tail. Well, what happened was, people went in there expecting something spooky, and that's what they got. All those paramedics, volunteers, tech teams, whatever they were, hell, even the other cops, they went in hoping to see something odd. Most of them, one way or another, got their wish, but it was just all consummation bias, you know? People just like looking out for what they already suspect is there. Even I had moments, but it was like, what? Did I actually see or hear what I thought I saw? Or was I just maybe a little bit tired and stressed? That makes more sense to me. I don't know if you're planning on using these interviews to stir the shit up or to debunk it or whatever, but I hope it's the latter. We can all look at ourselves in the eyes and admit the truth, right? There was nothing in that place. Anyway, I've been there for a long time, and back then I was just uniformed and helping with the search. 20 acres, and we had no idea how many people did or didn't live there. There's some stuff that suggested people had given birth there, so it was real important that we knew for a fact that there weren't a half dozen inbred infants starving to death in some bunker. Real fucked up stuff. But we needed to do it. And so we did. And that mostly involved a good old-fashioned search, which is what me and about half a dozen other officers spent the best part of 3 weeks doing. Anyway, there I am mucking around the creek that runs through the back end of the property when I spotted a storm drain. This guy had dozens of these things on his property, and it soon became clear that he used them as a secret way of going around. And this tunnel, it's big enough to stand in, and it's leaking piss-colored water into the river from the Rollins side of the property. Now, I radio it in for help, but they're going to be a few minutes, so I decided to saddle up a little closer and see if I can spot anything. Now, yeah, okay, I got a little freaked out. Where I'm standing, this thing is at about chest height, right? My ankles are about to here in the water, and I'm leaning my head into this massive drain, and I'm tired and wound up, and, well, that's when I hear it. Crying. Children crying. Except it didn't sound like children. It sounded like my children. And I guess that Papa Bear instinct kicked in, because even though I could have shit myself with fear, I still hauled myself up, making a hell of a mess of my clothes and looking for that sound. I didn't really let any thoughts form in my head. In rough times, that can be a bad idea. I just took a deep breath and kept on going. And going and going. I must have walked, 2 or 3 hours, maybe. I don't know. It was a dream. I figured just one long hallucinogenic episode. Yeah, that's the word. Kept on hearing my kids crying for me, though. They were begging me to hurry up. By the time I finally found the end of the tunnel, it opened up into a kind of nursery, I guess. It looked like a normal sort of classroom for kids around maybe age 3 to 5, but only at a glance. And yeah, sure, there were pictures drawn in crayon, but a closer look showed some fucking blood-eyed, red-eyed hovering over the sky while Mommy and Daddy broke bones and took in a little bit further just to PG-13. The books were all these handmade sort of things. The art was pretty good, but again, it wasn't your usual Dr. Seuss. One story talked about 2 friends who wanted to be closer than ever, except one of their families is about to move. So the whole book goes on normal as you would expect, talking about the girl's fears and worries about being apart, only for the plot to go totally fucking haywire and show them stitching their fucking faces together. Turned out well for them, though, apparently. The book shows them growing together, eating the same food and shitting out a different ass, closing one set of eyes and using the other to see, and the whole town is so amazed and impressed that their families decide to stay. And that's the end. Just all these people cheering around these 2 girls that are just growing into each other like a fucking horror movie from the 80s. Anyway, all of it, was lit by a kind of red emergency light bulb, with no fucking kids. Blackboard, chalk, little desk, small play area. Couldn't have had more than 10 kids in there at a time, and some of the desks, they looked unused. But no matter how hard I looked, there was no one in there. It was all just in my head messing with me. I mean, this isn't rocket science. I was out there looking for kids. Can't be a surprise my sleep-addled brain started conjuring sounds out of nothing. And a river? That's some white noise right there, and that stuff like that can make you hear all kinds of shit. I got a friend, every time it rains, he hears his father talking to him. It's more common than you think, like tinnitus. It's just the brain looking for patterns that aren't there. I was tense and all. I never told anyone this, but I was so fucked up that I took the book home. I must have when I wasn't looking. I must have just pocketed it and then took it back to my little girl. There's no other explanation. Not really, because the next morning before setting off again, I looked down and there she is. My little angel. Giggling her ass off at these pictures of these two girls merging like a pair of crunchy amoeba. I got a lot of flack from the missus and my girl. She's all grown up now. About my drinking and my temper. I don't feel guilty about any of that, though. I feel guilty about bringing that book back. With everything turned out how it did, it was alright in the end. But there were long stretches there when Bethany was out there, doped up out of her head, doing God knows what, and if I did fuck that girl up, no matter how many people tell me it wasn't the drinking, the screaming, or the shouting, the occasional slap around the head, I can't help but feel like it was letting that book get into her hands that it did. That was my sin. That's what keeps me up at night. Which is funny, cause well, she swears blind it turned up on her shelf that night before I got home. Now, of course, that just can't be true.
Professor Lagodi works at the University of Aberdeen and was brought in to consult on the material found at the Kentworth compound. He was initially unhappy to receive my call, but seemed pleased when I made it clear that he would not be expected to answer any direct questions.
So, comparative mythology is a lot of fun, but you need to be skeptical. It's not hard to read 1,000 stories and find what's common to them. And most people come to me with talk of ancient aliens and silly conspiracies. The simple truth is that the legends probably come from the same source, which is just an older legend. And yes, all cultures mention dragons, but it doesn't make more sense than the thing that inspired those legends was just, say, another legend. And not a real dragon. Alright, yeah, sure, maybe dinosaur bones come into play, but not actual dragons. And yet every time someone wants to speak to me, it's about the Mayan and the Egyptian pyramids and something to do with aliens and all of that lark. I like a bit of fantasy, but I get fed up with my work being used to come up with rubbish. At least Peter Rollins paid. Now, the guy was a loon. A difficult, angry, self-important loon, and it wasn't surprised in me that at least that he used his charm to exploit people, but at least he paid for my insights. So he wanted to know about I guess they call it the evil eye. Most cultures treat this as a kind of curse or a stare, but older records show the idea bleeding into the notion of God as an observer. The idea is that it's fundamental to the human psyche to feel watched, because without that sense of being an individual amidst the sea of other individuals, it can be harder to sort of construct an identity. It's very interesting stuff, actually, because not only does it fit into ideas of morality and guilt, God is watching so I must be kind, but also the very raw building blocks that we use to understand ourselves as human. There is God, there is man. We feel it, deep inside ourselves. And culturally, this sense of never really being alone, it kind of stems from a way that we exist in a mental space where there's no boundary between us and even our own thoughts. Like your mind exists with your mind, but you can picture a chair, right? And there it is in your head. A chair, but not only is it a false chair, an imagined chair, but it's actually you. It's your neurons firing in your head to make something that is, well, it's made of you. It's weird, but in your head there's you. That mental voice or whatever. And then there's all the other stuff that is also you. That kind of bleeds into this area that we're not alone in our own heads. So much as there's some argue that the foundation is all the theism. The sense that our actions matter, that we matter. That something is watching. And we can feel that something is watching us. But similarly, just as many religions and cultures have beliefs about how God has turned his eye away from our existence, Peter was very interested in this idea. The concept that we are no longer of interest to who had made us, that our world was denied that observation, so we replaced it with the voice in our head, which are just our voices. Now, he's let slip once or twice that he thought that it was possible to get God's attention back to us. His background was in neuroscience and mathematics, particularly complexity theory. So, a surprising amount of what he said went over my head, although I guess that kind of bullshittery is the point of a cult. Yes, he did try to recruit me. He also tied it to the quantum physics, talking about how observers alter the physical laws of reality. I've checked, and some physicists in the university say that it is essentially true, albeit nowhere near as mystical as Peter made it out to be. But he said that he could get God's attention back to us. Something to do with receivers and signals and neurosynchronicity. Then he would have the power to alter reality, or maybe something to that effect. Anyway, the last time that I spoke to him is because I asked if that was something that he really wanted. Now, he flew into a terrible rage, but I was only trying to humor him. And I felt like I had a point, you know? I mean, if we are all naughty kids on a cosmic timeout step, do we really want to get God's attention? He must have left for a reason. I'm not sure if he'd be pleased if we started throwing shit on the walls to get back out over at our little corner of creation. But that's not really what I wanted to ask him. Not really. I don't know why I didn't ask him, but what was really going through my head was, what if it's not God's attention that we get?
Mr. Coast had agreed to meet with me in the garden of his home. In 2009, his construction and refurbishment company agreed to take on a contract on behalf of the local council in order to begin demolition of the Kentworth compound. He's currently involved in a lawsuit with the government over its supposed failure to disclose the property's history and subsequent claims made by Mr. Coast and several of his staff that their work at the site resulted in long-lasting and debilitating injuries, both psychological and physical. He has historically resisted efforts at an interview, but for unknown reasons, agreed to speak with me.
The hardest thing has been dealing with something that no one wants to admit to. I used to think that there was some big conspiracy, but as time has gone on, I wonder if there isn't a simpler explanation. It started out with me and the boys fighting tooth and nail to get the council to admit to what they'd done. You could go into the street and ask anyone in that town what had happened in that place, and they'd tell you. As far as the council was concerned, it was just a bunch of bricks that we weren't entitled to know squat. It's been about 10 years since I filed that first lawsuit, and one by one, everyone else has dropped out, even after I agreed to cover any legal fees. And when I talk to them now, it's like they don't even want to admit it. I mean, these guys, they were there with me. We were all in the thick of it. I don't sit around doing paperwork. That's not my kind of company I run. And we were friends, a lot of us. Half of them have moved on to the other side of the world, and the other half have disappeared off the map, guzzling stolen beer in the gutter somewhere. The ones who hadn't left don't want to talk about it. I feel like they only let me put their names down out of a sense of obligation to me. Like they owe me something for fighting for them, but deep down they wish that I didn't bother. Because sooner or later some judge or barrister asks a single question that actually matters, and we get called up to answer, and it's just like, what happened? They ask, and none of us want to answer. We arrived 6 months after the suicides. No one said what or why. We were told there was an old house and that we had to go in and bring it all down. Take everything out and demolish it brick by brick. We were given an accepted list of equipment that we could hire on the government's behalf, and it wasn't actually great. I think they expected us to do it all with sledgehammers and picks, but damn if it wasn't tempting when they offered us a blank check. Public sector work is great like that. Money just gets thrown around willy-nilly, and I sure did fancy some. But you can imagine rolling into that place. We had no idea what we were in for. One look and it suddenly made sense why we were told to pick a quote once the job was done and the council would pay for it. There were these ridiculous annexes on the house. They'd added fucking doors. Whole new floors. Many of the place looked like some out of a kid's picture book. Alongside that, there were 4 porta cabins that needed dealing with, and over 20 acres that we found another 17 structures that had just sprung up, made out of corrugated iron, concrete, and chain link mesh. Oh, and there were these bunkers. Jesus Christ. Right from the start, we weren't happy about any of it. We didn't have any real way of saying how. We just knew it was wrong. There were still books on shelves, food in cupboards. All these people, they left their stuff behind, and the police did a piss-poor job of cleaning it up. Soon in a way, we all had to complain about what was a bit bigger than we thought. And the council didn't take our complaints very seriously. But in another way, I had to ask my employees to go clear out that still full rucksacks of a bunch of dead kids. It's tough work. Every new room had something truly fucked up, and worst part was how often it'd linger in your head like a kind of non-detail until you'd be lying there late at night and some deeply worrying question would pop up and you'd have no way to answer. Like there was a small room, a small clinical space with a wash basin and a shower, except big enough for a few people to get inside. You know, I didn't really make much of it. The mirror had been smashed, a small utility cupboard in the corner had the door taken off the hinges. There's some scratches on the floor. But that stuff was all over the place, you know. Couldn't really help but feel like you were walking through the scene of a siege. So that stuff, that wasn't unusual. No. What got me was the calendar. I didn't think much of it at first. There were all these girls' names on certain dates. Each one had a day or around it highlighted and then repeated every 28 days like clockwork. Amberly, May 16th. Mary, June 4th. Alicia, September 9th. When I flipped back, some of the names had been overlaid with gold stars or frowny stickers, like something you see at school. Anyway, it didn't strike me as odd until I went home with my wife, and she had a calendar herself, something that she kept beside the bed. And before I'm going to sleep, she leans over and she scribbles away and mutters something under her breath, and I ask her about it. She explains that she'll be ovulating that week. And you see, we were trying for a baby at the time. She tracked her cycle, highlighting the days that we'd have the best chance of conceiving. Well, it all clicked into place, didn't it? And I was left with a question that I didn't have a comfortable answer to. I think I must ask myself twice a day. How old was them girls? That kind of shit alone should entitle me to some compensation, you know? By the end of the first week, we were all fucked up. 3 guys had called in sick. One of the older gents had fallen off the wagon, which had me concerned. And every day I woke up wondering if I could bring myself to return. The real kicker was just how that place wasn't dead. I don't know if anyone there died or not. I don't know exactly what it was, but it wasn't dead. It wasn't done doing whatever it wanted to do. Maybe it was some ghost or some imprint of all that misery lingering behind. Or if maybe their fucked up hoodoo tainted it or whatnot. We had one kid get locked in a room on the 5th floor, and it took us about 2 hours to find him. A wedge had been shoved under the door from the other side, and I know for a fact that's not the sort of joke my guys would play. When we finally got him out, he stopped screaming for about an hour, and he was just huddled up on the floor, sobbing into his own knees. In the room, it wasn't just silent. Just an empty, quiet room with a bed in one corner and some pictures on the wall. We just kept asking him what happened, but the only thing he could do was look at the bed, just staring at it like a lion was going to pop out. His clothes were shredded. He had all these cuts up his arms. His shoes, they was missing. I mean, fuck, we never found those, never. But he was a mess, and he went straight off to the hospital, and afterwards I went back and I flipped that bed, and I don't know what I was expecting, but it wasn't a trap door. I had to stop one of the guys trying to go down it. Something about it, the way that it was just led into nothingness. The way there was a kind of faint, almost candlelight light at the bottom of that long, impossible shaft. And that kept me from letting anyone try it. If it led to a space between the walls or some secret compartment, which was most likely, then it all come crashing down with the rest of the house, and that was just fine by me. That poor lad never did come back. As far as I know, he's living in a home with carriers now, shocked senseless by whatever he saw coming out of the door. And there were other, lesser incidents. Some guy lost a finger to some machinery he swore blind that he'd switched off and unplugged. One guy had lights go off on him in that basement, and while he got out unhurt, he came out screaming his head off about someone else being down there with him. Someone who grabbed the cuff off his trousers as he ran back up the stairs and held him there. Their pale, glassy hand clutching on the fabric so hard it began to tear, and that's how he finally freed himself. By the time the second week was over, we all committed to working in groups, and that seemed to stop the accidents, or whatever they were, from happening for a while. I mean, the whole place just felt hostile. Like it was ready to go off on us at a moment's notice just for being there. You felt watched. Like 1,000 eyes were on the back of your head, and the second it got quiet, too quiet, you was alone. It'd take you and gobble you up in a heartbeat. And then there was them bunkers. Fuck me, them bunkers. 3 of them, I think. We gave up after the last one. For all I know, there are more down there. Way more. In fact, deep down, I reckon there's at least another one with live people still in it. Now, I guess for context, I should mention that I took the police about a week to dig up all the corpses in their various hidey holes. I'm sure some were lying down in the assembly hall, but at least another dozen were jammed in cupboards, closets, crawl spaces, and dangling from an attic rafters with their bony fingers still pressed to their lips. But there were even more in them bunkers. There's an empty one. Classroom at the, I guess. That one cleared out nice and easy, though. Some guys kept on saying sound carried funny down there because they kept catching the snippets of kids singing and playing. Another one was a proper little safe space, and it was a fucking massacre. No gore aside from broken nails or whatever they'd done to themselves in panic. They were all piled up against the door trying to force it shut only if it was too late, because they never got it all the way closed. Whatever followed floored them in seconds. Must have been. At least, that's what the cops told us. Now, what they didn't tell us, because they don't know, was that there was another bunker that was left for us to find. And just like the last one, it was filled with corpses. But this time, there were no police to cart them off before any rot set in, and I was left to have us just stumble across them by smell alone. 6 of them. 1 adult and 5 kids. Kids were hiding in different places, but hiding like kids do. Hiding under bed sheets or in dark corners with their fists balled into their eyes. The adult was slumped against the door, trying so hard to push it shut. Funny thing is, the damn thing swung open easily with just a shove when we got there. That's never been clear to me why all the people had such a hard time getting them closed. What's the matter? Some evil had stormed up that last drain tunnel and came barreling towards them, and it got them. Just like it gotten all the others. You know when you want something is, and you don't want to see it, you look anyway? It was clear to us that what we had found the second that we entered, but I still took a few steps in and I looked around. I saw kids still standing, or sitting upright, thumbs in their mouths. Rotten, grimacing mouths with lips pulled back so far their teeth and gums just jutted right out. And on the top bunk was a lump. Someone sitting under a sheet. I mean, fuck. I knew what it was, right? So why'd I pull that sheet back? And their eyes was still open. looking at me. Not through me, not behind me, not beside me, no. They was looking right at me. Teddy bear in one hand, balled up pajama bottoms on the side of the other, and an ancient piss stain soaking into the mattress. They was smiling. Like I said, after that we quit and we got the police to come in. They didn't sound too surprised more bodies had been found, and if I had to guess, I'd say that they suffered every second in that place just like we had, and they were in just as much of a rush to get over with and to leave. They knew it was half finished. And while I sympathize with them in some ways, I ain't never gonna fucking forgive them for letting us go in there and suffer on their behalf. Everyone wants to forget. I did too, for a long time. But yesterday my daughter calls me, bawling her eyes out from her mom's place. You wanna know what she said? She said she came back from the toilet in the middle of the night, and someone was sitting in her bed. She pulled over them. They were just upright shape, sobbing quietly, saying quietly over and over again, "They can't see me. They can't see me. They can't see me." I swear on my fucking life, I heard them same words whispered in that bunker.
The current subject wishes to remain unnamed and without description.
Rollins was a fucking trip, man. Gene, that is, not Peter. I mean, I never really knew the younger one. Not really. His whole family was interested in custom psychedelics, and there are many labs still out there ready to innovate like I am. Like I said, I always dealt with Gene. The older one, he was funny and wild, and he had a poet's soul. I told him I wanted to drive from one coast of the states to the other and write a book along the way, and he decided to join me. And so we wound up hitting the road tanked up with so much fucking mescaline and peyote. It's a miracle we never came back. Shame we never went to Amsterdam at the time. You think that we got to Utrecht? It was a blast anyway. In hindsight, we should have realized that they don't really have any canal boats in Nevada. Like I said, Gene was down to party, and he spoke to me a lot about his old man who was a special case of fucked up. He was a mine inspector or something like that. A geologist, maybe? Anyway, one day he went down into a dark hole and he came back all kinds of different. Now, he was dark and nasty, abusive in just about every way that you could be. He insisted on homeschooling his kids. Now, Gene was around 16 at the time and he just up and left, but Peter was younger, maybe about 8 or 9. Gene told me it fucked him up to leave his brother behind, but he had to. When I finally met Peter, he was a lot like his brother, but a little darker, a little less fun. For the first years, I kind of thought of him as like a photocopy of Gene, something slightly different, maybe faded, but he wasn't. Gene was all about the journey, the fun, sex, drugs, and rock and roll, baby. He and I were about keeping that dream alive right up into the Bush era. Peter had a very specific request about what I made for him. It was all while working for him on an actual chemistry side of stuff that I realized he was smart in a way that Gene never was. You know, you might get the chance to speak to some of the cops who went into that compound, and one of them got it right. Looks like a fucking gorilla in a suit, but he got it right. He'll tell you all those symbols and voodoo shit was just a bunch of nonsense made to distract, but he was right. It was never about that. It was about the water supply. Now, I didn't realize Peter was putting this stuff in the water. Hell, I didn't even know what this stuff was. He told what to make and how I did it, sometimes doing other favors for him too. He'd pay me enough cash to keep on tripping for a whole year. And somewhere along the line, Gene faded out of the scene. God knows what he's doing now. Cooking barbecue with his wife and kids and saying, "Oh golly," instead of swearing probably. Peter kept on ticking, and sooner or later I knew we'd come to blows. You see, me, I've traveled farther than anyone else has traveled, and I've done it from comfort of my own home, and let me tell you what's out there. Let me tell you what's secret behind human spirituality. Nothing. We're just a bunch of hairless monkeys clinging to a fucking rock, just jerking off. When you come to peace with all that, all that's left is to just grab a banana with one hand and your cock with the other. It's liberating. Peter, he disagreed. Violently disagreed. Not only did he feel offended by the idea that there was nothing else out there, he actually thought that the right mental state could be used to send out some kind of broadcast of a kind of, "Hey, look at us over here." I never really learned what he meant, just that he wanted to get something attention and is all about turning his mind into the right frequencies and then sort of broadcasting an idea. Later on, he'd tell me that he was close. It was all about getting the right numbers, like launching a dozen flares instead of just one. I don't know why I'm telling you all this next bit aside. I don't know, I better actually remain fucking anonymous. But I sabotaged the last batch. And I guess I had a bad trip or something, because I just woke up one day with this idea in my head that he couldn't be allowed to keep on broadcasting that signal out into the world. Not with all these people. I don't know. I never changed my mind. I'm still adamant that there's nothing spiritual out there, not really. I mean, there's no meaning. That's the only lesson that we need to learn, but fuck, staring into that darkness one night high as a fucking kite on acid. The idea that something might be staring back just wormed its way into me and had a bit of a journey. I just couldn't have it. And I never really understood what it was and I'd been making, but I knew a few slight adjustments to it would turn it into coffee sweetener or something like that, you know. Having a bit of fun, man. Hell, I'd taken it myself a few times, and as far as I could tell, it wasn't even psychoactive. So what the hell was he doing it, dosing his followers up every day with the damn stuff? I couldn't say it, but I figured what difference would it make if I swapped an H with a C and turned it into a chemical gibberish with no real effect on the body? If something's out there, I didn't want that fucker getting its attention. And so I didn't know that they'd built up a dependency. I didn't know how its absence would, apparently it is psychoactive. It's also extremely addictive. And when people experience withdrawal, they don't experience it quietly. I know a lot of bodies were found peacefully resting in that main assembly hall. You notice how rarely the police throw around the word poisoned, even though that's the official verdict? They weren't poisoned. Just look at the girls in the car, man. They was fucking butchered. The truth is, no one actually knows what happened up there. Deep down, I'm pretty sure I was responsible somehow.
This interviewee will not speak to me openly, but specifically wrote the following testimony and asked for its inclusion. I was about 9 when we moved in. I hated it. I hated it something special. Dad left Mom when I was about 3 and he'd always been the provider. She had dropped school when she was 14 and had no qualifications. She had no home, no family, so he got a job as a cleaner, and when it became clear that wouldn't be enough, she got another job. And then he had to get another one on top. All my brothers and sisters were adults with their own kids and their own problems, so Mom couldn't count on them. I loved her right until the end, even after everything that happened. Now I get it. She had a rough life, and somehow she got caught up with this Rollins guy. She was so happy right up until she turned up and saw how young all the other girls were. Every night she was a wreck, drinking and sobbing quietly about how this was her last chance at true happiness. She couldn't understand why he'd picked her to come along, but even as a kid, I knew. I saw it in the way that the teachers looked at us, the way that they spoke to us. Our lessons were mediation, plenty of water, and hours spent focusing on different shapes and weird images. They looked like static and colors, sometimes videos, and every day we would have to focus on them, and it wasn't hard, but over time it got easier and better. Sometimes kids would fall over shaking, bleeding out their noses, mouths, and eyes. Sometimes they'd start screaming, and if they did, they'd be dragged away and would spend hours drawing what they'd seen in the static. It was a slow effect, something that didn't go away just because you stopped looking at the pictures. Those images burned themselves into your eyes, and that was the point. To this day, I'm adamant that they put something in our food or in our water. I don't know. The whole time I was there, I felt different. Funny, but it wasn't like I was high or anything. I just felt watched. All of the time. I think there was something about the combination of pictures and whatever they were doing to their heads that was the point of it all. All of the masses and prayers and special rituals were just set dressing. How we were the chosen special people. It was all the kids who had mattered. And towards the end, I started getting into it. I started to get this sense that I was looking at something that, and it was looking back. But it was out of focus, and it was kind of a hard puzzle, and I loved puzzles. I didn't enjoy the way that those pictures made me feel, but I hated seeing the other kids get rewards for doing better than me. If you drew a good picture, a great one, the kind of thing that Mr. Rollins would take for his personal collection, then they would let you shower and have other treats. To this day, I have never hated anyone as much as I hated the kids who got to have butter on their toast at breakfast time. Looking back, it was all sick. All of it. But I wanted to make Mom proud, and I wanted her to be happy. If I could be good enough to get Mr. Rollins' attention, then maybe we'd get our own room. Maybe Mom could have a day off on the weekend. Maybe they'd just let her work on laundry instead of having to clean their toilets. Peter Rollins was a nasty piece of work. He had his claws in each and every one of us. He knew exactly how to twist and turn his words so that way you thought you wanted to do what he wanted. They never did find his body. They never know what happened to him. But I did. It started slow. A few people started to get a little ill. Not violently or anything. They just lose all their energy and start sleeping, collapsing where they worked, or making beds out of whatever they could find at hand. People started forgetting stuff. Mr. Rollins would forget his speeches during the morning communion. Our teachers would come in and just sit there staring at the walls. All the kids stopped playing one by one. Then we just turned into zombies, and the word going around was that there was a disease. But then other rumors started talking about a come down, which I didn't understand as a kid. The whole time there had been a sheen of life in that place, a kind of haze that you didn't realize was there until it was gone. And it got worse pretty quickly, even when Mr. Rollins got sick and we went into his room and we didn't see him again until right until the end. Soon people stopped waking up or leaving bed, and once the higher-ups got it, all functioning broke down. We stopped harvesting crops, stopped going to town to buy essentials. We even stopped opening the gates for deliveries. Everyone was either slumped down or somewhere or asleep. There were a few nights like that, of total silence. And then the talking started. At first, people would just mumble, and it seemed kind of normal if you only saw one of them doing it. Except in the dorms, it was obvious something was wrong. People were mumbling in sync, making the same weird grunts and half words at each other and at the same exact time. Soon it was a full-blown speech, talking about everything and nothing. Mom got it pretty bad, and she was one of the first to open her eyes. It was eerie, holding her hand while she lay there speaking in an unfamiliar accent, unblinking eyes fixed on some distant point behind the ceiling. Indices, indecent, recent, reform, to feel the reform beneath us, bequeath, because we feel the indecent cries of non-believers. It was gibberish, all of it, but I remember sitting there and begging her to stop, thinking it quietly to myself over and over, "Please, stop, Mom, please, wake up." "Please wake up," she said, the choir of voices reverberating throughout the whole compound. "Please stop, Mom." And by that point, people had stopped drinking, eating, or even moving. One guy had collapsed outside, face to the sky, and after a day or two lying in the sun, his skin was starting to crack and to bleed. Most of the kids were getting away with it half all right. The sickness was awful, felt like getting hit by a freight train, like the worst goddamn hangover in the world, except that you're just a kid and you don't know why. But we would still move around and try to help where we could, although all of us had pretty much spent our time riveting to the side of our parents, feeding and giving them water. Even the youngest of us got a sense that these things were deeply, darkly wrong. You couldn't hear that chanting and feel any other way. My mother was the first to get up. She threw her legs to the side and looked at me, and she was still talking, but looking right at me, and all I saw was hate. It was the most terrifying, heartbreaking thing I'd ever seen. I couldn't fathom why she looked at me like that, but she did. And it hurt me so bad that I felt ass backwards and started bawling like a toddler. I knew she was going to kill me. I knew it, and I accepted it because in my kid heart I couldn't imagine doing anything against her. She'd been the arbiter of my whole life, my creator and nurturer, and I knew there was nothing that I could do to stop her. My screaming rose to a high pitch when she grabbed the knife, rising and rising until all sound disappeared and it became a shrill whistle of air escaping from my lips like a dreamer's cries to wake up. And when she stuck the knife to her throat, the nubby little blade disappearing into her skin like a magic trick, I stopped wailing and stared. She pulled it across the whole way, and I became aware that all around me other adults had stood up. One of them, I can't remember. She was speaking, asking what had happened and taking it all in. But I wasn't really paying attention to her. I was watching my mother, whose throat had run rivers of red down her dingy vest. She wasn't gurgling or crying or even moving much at all. She just waited a few long seconds before pulling it out and started again, this time on her belly. I ran, slipping at one point and hitting my head hard, but I kept going, glimpsing people all around the compound rising and moving to unknown goals. Some were adults who'd come back normal. One tried to even grab me and herd me along with some other kids to a safe place, but I shook free and I made for the fence. And when a few dozen of the chanting adults finally broke down the front door to the farmhouse, that's when the screams hit fever pitch. I'll never know why they did it to each other exactly, but it didn't sound nice. And by the time I looked back, I was right by the fence, probably 200 meters from the house itself. And I could see figures moving in the windows, but the shapes were confusing. I think they were butchering each other. And over the sounds of terrible cries, a few of them were singing. It wasn't a sound like anything that I'd ever heard, but it practically knocked me out and I had to fight the urge to just collapse and to give up. I knew there was a small spot near the fence that was big enough to crawl through, and that's what I used to get clear of the house. It's a long drive to the property, though. A single muddy lane that I had to navigate in darkness. And at some point, a car came rumbling past and I nearly jumped out to cry for help, but I remembered where it was coming from. And instead I jumped into a ditch and I hid in the shadows as its blinding light flashed overhead. And once it passed, I tried to get a look at who was in it, but all I could pick out were a few heads and something on the roof of the car. I think it looked like a person, but some deep-rooted part of my mind told me that it wasn't. In my nightmares, I'm back on that road. walking and walking, and I know that it'll never end and that the sun will never rise. I might see a far-off sign that tells me that I'm close to the main road, but I know my eyes can't be trusted. Just that I know that there's something that has left the compound to come looking for me. There's no cover, just open fields and a few hedges, but in the dark it's all just ink blots that I can't focus on, contrasting only against the bluish night sky that sometimes isn't very bluish or much like a sky, but rather like a membrane of rotting oil paints. Mr. Rollins, I found him clambering out of a storm drain way at the edge of the 4-mile driveway. Figures that he'd had some kind of escape route, but the poor bastard hadn't really thought it out. Somewhere along the line, he'd ordered it shut off with a cast iron gate locked with a padlock only he had a key for. That's what he had told me anyway, screaming and crying for some kind of help. He was naked, clearly without the key he desperately needed, and I tried to help him. But it was clear to even my childish mind that there was no moving that gate, not without tearing the damn thing off the hinges out of the concrete. And meanwhile, his cries kept growing worse and worse, and in the end I had to step away because he started to grab and pull at me. He was trying to yank my arm into the tunnel, casting furtive glances over his shoulder. I didn't like the look in his eye, and when I heard the pitter-patter of footsteps behind him, I knew why. "Please, kid," he had sobbed. "Just give me your hand." Something clattered in the tunnel, just out of sight, but so damn close that it was the loudest thing in the night. And just like that, all the pleading mercy fell from Mr. Rollins' face. "Give me your fucking hand," he had screamed. I remember his voice was bunched up like an animal. "Give it here and fucking die with me, you piece of shit." I had turned and ran away, terrified by the sounds that came out of the grate. Not just his screaming, mind you, but the actual sounds of what was happening to his body. I remember him saying on my very first day that when God's gaze returned to our humble world, he'd be first and foremost in the Lord's attention. Personally, I'm not convinced that it was God looking our way at all. But I do think that Mr. Rollins was given special attention. Gary Willow is a former YouTube and Instagram influencer, better known for being a member of Riley Alton's entourage. A lifelong friend of Riley's, Gary left his job in 2011 to work for Riley's growing production company, specializing in urban exploration and spiritual phenomena. Riley's YouTube channel boasted millions of followers and viewers, although after his death, the account was taken down and all content removed. In 2013, as part of a segment on mass suicide and cults, Riley, along with Gary and 3 other members of his crew, had broken into Kentworth compound to film what was expected to be one of their most popular videos.
No, it was never fake. I'm not saying we actually got ghosts of anything, but everyone was so adamant that we just made it all up, and I swear half our audience was skeptics desperate to prove us wrong. Like at that abandoned club when we went into Brazil, where all those people got shot up. I swear on my life that door moved on its own. No fishing line. It legit moved on its own. Riley was a lot of things, but he wasn't actually that fake. And I've met a lot of influencers, and yeah, he was cut from the same cloth, but at the same time, he was a lot better than most of them. And it was me, funnily enough, who got wind of the Kentworth compound, not Riley. I got a tip from someone, and they're all a bunch of bullshit, but the more that I followed up on this one, the realer the story became. I couldn't believe no one was talking about this place and the Rollins cult. Sure, it wasn't exactly huge in terms of fatalities, but the sheer weirdness of it all was just awesome. Of course, in hindsight, given what happened to our YouTube channel, it's obvious why the story was so subdued and outright censored in some parts. Enough money can buy you just about anything. And we were idiots. We were all up there thinking that it was a gold mine. We'd gotten so desensitized that the goosebumps on our skin and the voice screaming in the back of our heads to get out was just another sign that we'd made the right call to drive all the way out there. And part of the house was half demolished. Windows smashed up, plasterwork pulled apart, tools and diggers still rotting where the last construction company had tried and failed to finish the job. It was perfect. You could walk into one room and get a shot of a wall half crumbling, the bricks crushing a child's tricycle, and the other room there'd be a dining table with the cutlery still laid out. And I'm talking blood streaks on windows, fingernails left scattered over floors next to gouges in the wood, and smashed in kitchen cupboards with children's blankets balled up in the back, soaked in God knows what. And it was silent in there. Absolutely haunting. Like when you're at a funeral parlor and your mind starts playing tricks on you, so you think that you can hear the sound of something breathing, but it's just the sound of your blood vessels pumping into your own skull. Like there was no sense that you could hear something almost embedded in the white noise of your own head. Like voices coming from a scrambled TV signal. Even when stuff started moving, we all thought it was just great footage. Windows opening for no reason, doors slamming shut, music playing from smashed up speakers. We just kept goading on it for hours, right up until we made it to the very top floor, where the leader's room had been. I went in first to get some opening shots, and even though Riley and the others were no more than a few feet behind me, I felt scared. Truly scared. And for the first time. A chill had come over me as if I had just stepped on my own grave. And when I looked around at the bare walls and the ascetic bed, I noticed something that tore a hole through my belly. Like the whole world had dropped right out from under me. There was a hand. A nasty, misshapen thing, gray in the faint light of the moonlight. And all the fingers were different lengths, like a mangled spider. It was a ghoul's hand, the kind that you picture scratching at your bedroom window late at night. And when I spotted it, I stayed perfectly still, hyperventilating while I was wrestling with the implications of what I saw. And all that tension in me finally broke when the hand had moved, inching slightly further out from beneath the bed. And I had turned to dart towards the door, and that's when the door behind me had slammed shut. I had dislocated my shoulder trying to break it down. Somehow, even when a larger circular window set in one wall and the moon out full, the room had started getting darker, and I felt this cloying, desperate need to escape. I was screaming so loud that I didn't notice the others were screaming for help too. All that mattered to me was leaving, getting out at any cost. I didn't want to look back. Everything in my head was just pure nightmare, so I kept my face fixed on the door that I had punched and kicked while the skin on the back of me tightened and I got so damn terrified that I could feel my vision start to blur. I was close to passing out. That's how scared I was. It wasn't just the shadows. No, I knew with absolute certainty that something was approaching me. The air was getting colder. A faint scraping was present just beneath the sound of my screeching cries, and that thing's presence made the skin on my back crawl, and the feeling was getting worse with every second. I got so bad that I turned around desperate to get rid of the fear. That's how it works, right? You scare yourself up over something that isn't real, like, say, a hand beneath the bed. And your mind does the rest. All you need to do is reassert yourself, fight against the darkness and face it, and you'll see that it all along was just make-believe. But there was really something else in that room with me. A man, or something like a man. He had long, straight hair, but his face looked like a mess of folds. There was no expression because he had nothing to express with. No eyes or mouth, just a kind of mass of churning skin like braided bread dough. I think there were eyes, but they looked more like spider's eyes buried in between the cracks of a crab's shell. Something about that face, the way that I couldn't read it or its intentions, the way that it so utterly defied everything I knew about living beings, it pushed me off the edge and I passed out. And when I came to, I was out in the yard. My camera smashed up and I was missing 3 fingers. Bitten right off at the knuckle. Doctor thought that it looked like a turtle had done it. And sometimes at night I get these images of my hand being dragged towards a snapping beak hidden beneath liquid flesh that's damned and cold to the touch. There was no sign of anyone else around me when I woke up. but I didn't stick around to look. I ran right out to the car and I drove away so goddamn fast I nearly flipped the car, taking the left turn out of the driveway. Right by the property line, just as I swerved, I saw an old storm drain. Something bolted over with heavy iron doors. I only glanced at it out of sheer chance, and as I was going too fast to get a proper look, but I swear I saw someone's hand gripping those bars. Not a nasty, pustule hidden ridden hand like the one that had come clawing out of the bed, but a familiar one. A normal one. It was one of those others who had gone with me, I think. They call it survivor's guilt. They tell me that it's normal, but nothing about what I experienced was normal. And I think that's what really gets to me, is that deep down I'm scared that I'm not the only survivor. And that hand I saw gripping those bars, I fear that's the owner still down there. Still trapped. All of them taken by that place, and that's the thing. I just don't know. I'll never know. None of us will.
Arnold Milson is a short man with sideburns and patchy facial hair. And he stands watching me with beady eyes as I approach the front porch of his house, as though I am liable to bite him. I know that he is in his late 40s, but he appears significantly older.
You always hear about it being something that happens to kids. Wandering around in places where they are fucking about near a well, and then plop, in they go. I guess it shouldn't have been a surprise that I went down. Well, with my bad leg. But the truth is, the first thing I felt when I opened my eyes was pain or confusion. It was just sheer embarrassment. You always hear about kids falling down them wells, not 38 old men. There I was, slightly dodgy hip, lodged in a fucking 30-foot hole in the ground. Not that there being any warning. No signs, no wall. Just a little hole halfway down the slope at a hill that I'd never come cresting over. Just bad luck, really. And coming the other way, I would have spotted it a mile wide and avoided it easily enough. But I didn't. And I was left stuck in that darkness in waist-high water that was stale and dark and smelled of piss. Possibly mine. Thank fuck that I had my phone on me and it had kept dry in a jacket pocket. A quick call and my sister was on her way with the police, but what did that mean, really? What it meant is that I wouldn't die in there, but it wasn't like I couldn't give her my exact location. I didn't have GPS. Couldn't get it down there either. And she had to get the police and then come find me, and that wasn't going to be quick. And so I was stuck down there. Not forever, but in the end, it took them about 11 hours to find me, and a further 2 to rescue me. In those 13 hours, to me, they were like the longest book ever written. It started with a kind of patient stoicism, and I resisted the urge to panic, especially knowing help was on the way. I disregarded my surroundings and focused on the light overhead. I ignored the smell around me and the other way the water made my skin tingle. I told myself that I wouldn't let it get to me. The blind panic. I focused on my breathing, spoke aloud to break the silence. Hell, I even sang for a while. And that was the first hour. Sooner or later, my mind was going to wander. It had to. So I tried to set it in on the angonized path. I kicked around with my feet until I hit something solid. There's a beam of wood, and I stood it up and lifted it myself a further 6 inches up out of the water, and then stood back down. It was too hard to balance on with my leg, but that was pretty much all I could sense around me. Sounds silly now, but I didn't want to look around too much, so I kept my phone light off for the first hour. It was the spiders. I knew they was down there. I'm terrified of them, and I knew from my experience the best place to find the big, nasty, hairy ones was in a dark hole rarely treaded on by human feet. And oh boy, was this place hollow ground for arachnids. So far that I really figured out that the wall was soft earth with thick roots bulging out, but I could hear something dripping, and it wasn't above or below, it was right next to me. But somehow it sounded far away. I told myself this was exactly why I had to keep my mind on track. The drip didn't help none. It didn't mean anything. But it was a long time to stand there and pretend like I wasn't so terrified that in the end I gave in. And I turned the light on and I regretted it instantly. There was at least 7 of them. Massive, enormous, hairy things. Too big for home living. These weren't the kind of house spiders that you find under a sofa. Oh no. And I hated them. I hated the sight of them. Their sheer presence burning a hole in my skin right through the clothes. The biggest one was nearly as wide as my palm, and for a brief moment I told myself that I'd fallen right into my own personal hell. The thought was right. My timing was wrong. As soon as it was on, my light sent all the buggers crawling away, and okay, while the sight of their wiry legs slamming over each other nearly made me sick, the truth was that was all there was to it. They were harmless, utterly and completely benign. And once they was gone, I was finally able to recall why I turned my light on in the first place. And I swung it around looking for the source of the dripping until I spotted a small cast iron grate in the wall. Now, I'm not exactly an expert on walls, so I wasn't quite sure what to make of it. And I genuinely figured wells were full of water or just big holes. If any tunnels intersected them, they ought to be full of water too. Or at the very least made by underground rivers and so on. And who, I wondered, took the time or effort to stick a great big bloody grate on one of these tunnels, and for what possible reason? To keep something out? To keep them in? And these tunnels was no more than 2 or 3 foot high, and the grate even smaller than that, maybe a foot at most. I tried angling the light around, but all I saw was dripping walls thick with clay and stone. The place so utterly dark it practically resisted the light. And for a brief moment I considered trying to pull the grate loose, but I was concerned it might damage the structure of the wall. I also couldn't say for sure whether I wanted to get much closer to it than I already was. I tried telling myself that it was a calming presence. The tunnel right beside me should have done something to break up the oppressiveness and sense of enclosing space, but if anything it made me feel vulnerable. And I looked towards the light and I saw no sign of anything, just a pale blue disk. Then I had wondered briefly if the spiders had left me behind for, well, for what? I didn't know. I was thinking silly things then at the time and didn't seem rational. But the feeling felt as real as if the water soaking my hips and my legs. And I felt vulnerable once I knew about that tunnel. I didn't like having it there, right by me. And without thinking, I angled away towards the opposite wall. I turned my light off and desperate to clear my mind of this worry. So I looked up back towards the sky. And someone was looking down. I should have leaped with joy, and for a moment I almost did. But I couldn't see this person. It wasn't like glimpsing up at one of the homies on the street. No. All I could see was an outline. A shadow cut right out in the sky. The distance felt alienating. And I couldn't hear or see a thing about them. It was all drips and splashes by me, but from up there, nothing but the stony silence of the gentle breeze. And this person, they was leaning over the hole with both arms across the span as if they were surveying a catch. And I suddenly felt like a rat trapped in a big fucking hole. And I remember crying out to them, telling them that I had fallen. They slid away without making a noise. It could have been nothing. No one there at all, except the trick of the light. Or perhaps there was someone there and they saw me in the darkness. Perhaps the wind was so strong up there that they had no chance of hearing me. Or maybe. I looked back at the grating. That sense of vulnerability had magnified by then. My mind was making the strangest connections. Wasn't the Kentworth compound nearby? didn't they dig tunnels? Kids talk about strange shapes and noises up there all the time, but that's just hearsay and rumor, ain't it? Now my heart was starting to race. Isn't it amazing how vivid the imagination can be sometimes? I got lost in my own head, standing there, eyes wide, staring at that patch of shadow where I felt the gentle draft waft through. Now I couldn't see a damn thing, but in my head I could picture everything clearly. Right there, just a few feet away, was a twisted monster. Their smile pinned wide to either side of their head like on one of the Hellraiser film that scared the hell out of me when I was a kid. And I kept replaying that scene over and over, torturing myself. Sometimes it'd be a dead kid, pale hands clutching either side of the bar, or a malicious ghost intending on trapping me in a twisted reenactment of their own death. Other times it'd be spiders, one great big one popping the grate aside so its crooked knotted legs could envelop and drag me towards the center of their octagonal body. Or maybe even thousands of little ones bulging through the bars just like jelly pushing through a sieve. To think that kind of terror lies beneath our feet. All I had to work with was some slippery walls, water, and mud. But in a few short hours, my own head had turned that place into hell itself. Now I was wondering how I'd gone from a brisk morning walk to unrelenting psychological torture in a single misplaced step. And eventually it got too much to bear. When I checked my phone, I saw that it had been no more than a half an hour since I had last looked. All that my imagination had done was slow down the passage of time and make it infinitely worse, so I worked up the nerve to turn on that light and re-examine the small tunnel. It was just like before, just mud and stagnant water that trickled so faintly into the well. Didn't even make a noise. I moved that light around some more, but every time I did, the shadowy cast by the bars moved all over the place. Like a strobe light, and I was getting ready to give up when my brain told me to freeze. Now, I didn't know why, not straight away, but it had done so with such urgency that I stopped completely. That's when I saw it. Movement that had been masked by my own. I still couldn't say what exactly it was, but it looked almost like the wall itself was moving. And then the wall looked at me. It was just seconds ago a misshapen pile of mud was a head turning to look right fucking at me. Now, there was no noise. Not even a mouth, really, just features cut into clay. But those eyes was bloodshot orbs. Rich and vivid with detail. Familiar but somehow utterly alien. I couldn't read them. Their expression, and that scared the hell out of me. My mind was on fire with 1,000 questions about who they was, how they got there, and if they were even human. But the one that was embossed in red letters and splayed across my mind was like a neon exit sign. That was the one that I seized on and I couldn't let go. What did they want? They didn't flinch when I spotted them, but they did start moving faster. Felt like I was watching myself from afar, like an out-of-body experience. I couldn't fathom that this was happening. That someone was down there, looking like something out of a fucking horror film and moving right towards me. And when they reached the grate, they started to push against it. And this thing was exactly riveted into concrete. I could see it starting to bulge, and I ran forward and I slammed a foot against the metal to hold it in place. And that meant getting closer, though, and that meant getting a glimpse of them before I kicked the grate back into place. And all I saw were bits and pieces. Eyes, rotten teeth, something shiny that caught the light. And I soon got to find out what that was when something slid into the heel of my foot, long and sharp. I pulled back immediately, shocked and disgusted at the sight of blood running and mixing with the rancid groundwater that I had stood in, and when I looked back there was a glistening blade slipped jutting from between the bars. And then it repeated. The grate started to move, it started to push. A single eye. Penny-sized pupils with ghostly reflections looking back at me with terrifying apathy. I stepped forward and I kicked again. This time they missed, but I saw the full length of that blade and part of me registered just how bad the situation was. The next time that I kicked at them, I wasn't so lucky and that blade slipped right into the arch of my foot, tearing through the roof of my hiking boots and painting a grisly image on the way back out. But I sure as hell didn't let up. No, I did not. I kept in there, holding it tight whilst my attacker indulged and hacked away like they was breaking up ice. The only sounds was me, the splash of water, and the heavy gurgling breaths of whatever lay on the other side. And I thought that it had been hell before. When they eventually stopped attacking, my right foot was in ribbons and I fell back into the water with relief. Thank God I landed on that beam and it kept my head above the water and stopped me from losing off all balance. That thing grinned right then, stretching a toothless mouth from ear to ear that dribbled with pink froth. There was still no nose, no hair, just a shape carved right out of the mud. At least that's what it looked like. That hungry gullet must have led to the real flesh and blood stomach, my attacker probably no more than a lunatic caked in clay. But whoever they was, they'd been twisted so far from the human idea they scared me worse than any special effects I'd ever seen. I found myself starting to scream. The thing wasn't going away. It wasn't slinking back into the depths. It was savoring this experience. Savoring my terror and my suffering. And at least that's what I imagined. Because in truth, I don't know what it wanted. And that face, even when smiling, looked like an idiot's face devoid of all rational thought. It just kept breathing, panting, slobbering, eyes fixed on me like a pervert in the bushes. And I just wanted it to stop. I wanted to wake up, to burst the bubble and escape this hallucination, this damn hell that I find myself in, but shit. Anything except stay there like that. Stuck in its line of sight whilst my mind turned the seconds into decades. I didn't pass out. I didn't wake up. It didn't try breaking through again. There was no conclusion, no inciting incident to push past the fear, just me and that thing, less than a meter apart. It would take another 7 hours before I would finally escape. You know, they amputated my foot, not just from the sheer damage that they had done to it, but because of the rancid infection that had grown from within. The disease lurking in that water damn near killed me, and the official word is that I had broken my leg in a gnarly way and spent about half a day trapped in a fever dream. Oh boy, I sure wish that was something that I could believe. But every one of those long, agonizing seconds trapped down there are still engraved in my memory like an obituary in granite. I pinched myself, slapped myself, cried, jumped up and down. Nothing about my time down there was a dream. It was hard, real. And when it caught the light, it glistened like metal.
The current interviewee has requested strict anonymity.
The acquisition of the compound in question was never up for discussion, with us or anyone on the research team. It had been found, and that was all that mattered. If not for the letter, then I would have never drawn the connection between the compound that we tested and the events at the Kentworth compound. On one hand, it was a relief to realize that the thing was bigger than just us. But at the same time, I think that we all secretly had been hoping we'd been going mad, and this suggested otherwise. Thank God we had never moved on to human testing. It's bad enough that we weren't really equipped for the job. You always think that the government will choose people at the top of their game for this secret spy shit, but more often than not, they contract a company like ours and just don't tell anyone the truth. I've heard they single out firms with poor safety records as a cover, and we just come out of a horrific scandal involving some children, a river, and a chemical that turns you blue. Even at the time, I remember thinking that we'd make some pretty good pasties if that's what they were looking for. I was vindicated with time, but not before the worst of it. Like I said, we never got into humans, but we started out testing with mice and rats. When we first mapped the chemical structure of the compound, all our software told us was that it'd be inert in the central nervous system, although one deep learning algorithm we sometimes use on forensic cases went buck wild and practically melted. We didn't really think anything of it because the early tests that immediately followed showed that the compound was exactly that, inert. There were no behavioral changes whatsoever, and aside from odd electrical readings on the EEG, brain scans often showed no differences. Of course, some things need to accumulate over time, and brain scans are very limited in what they really tell us. It's like trying to predict what software a computer is running by getting a heat map of its components. And sure, it doesn't tell you something, but it's not exactly a magic window into the underlying activity. All you can do is just keep testing and see what comes of it. I suppose I should mention at this point that our lab was based in a pretty remote location. Our firm is a subsidiary of a subsidiary to some massive PMC. We were housed with a few other teams on an oil rig looking into certain bacteria. And, well, this was a pretty tough place to live at the best of times. It was lonely, but always busy, always teeming with hundreds of faceless people who ignored you as they rushed past. And my team, we were buried down into the depths of this place, hanging over the sea beneath. And so people got spooked. I don't know how exactly, but they did. It hadn't happened before. But one by one, my staff started calling in sick more and more often until pretty soon I was left wondering why I'd been left in the lurch. Turns out, after a very frank and heated meeting I held one day in our lunchroom, there was a kind of spreading anxiety. There were maybe about 6 of us at most, and I listened as they told me all about the way that the rodents started staring at them, the way machines were breaking at 10 times the usual rate, and the way they felt watched in any given room when left alone. The worst thing was that I'd noticed it too. The mice and the rats had slowly changed. Behavior had altered by degrees over the space of a month, and now they no longer squeaked or played or groomed. Instead, they simply watched, and it was always us who held their attention. They stopped sleeping, eating, or even moving, and a far few of them started to die from sheer lethargy. That was when someone stepped up and told me how they'd seen something particularly worrying. They were cleaning out the tanks one day, dumping the dead rats into special refuse sacks ready for incineration, when they reached in and the live ones attacked her, nipping at the very dusty glove and fighting so violently that she lost it to their grip. Thankfully, she pulled out her hand just in time and snapped the glass shut. But the nightmare wasn't over, because that's when the bag moved. The one filled with dozens of dead pink bodies, their dull red eyes glaring at her from pointed albino faces. Thank God the incinerator is right there in the lab, and thank God she had the sense to turn it on ready. And in one swift burst of terror and bravery, she snatched the bag and practically threw it into the flames, crying at the sound of their pained squeals. What was all of this that I was hearing exactly? I had to do something with this information, that was for sure, but I didn't know what. We took on dangerous work, we knew that. And in the end, I agreed to the new rule where no one could be left alone in the lab. Even if someone had to go to the toilet, they had to go in pairs and stay close. I treated it as kind of a infectious fear, dismissing my concerns that we were all longtime staff used to these work conditions. I also decided to take on more of the lab work itself, and just to show everyone that we were in no real threat, I took on a number of late-night tasks that I did on my own. I used to go in at night ready to run any necessary tests and do my best to pretend everything was okay. Though the thrum of the ocean and the endless cacophony of machines seemed impossibly distant down in the lab. And pretty soon I got the vague sense of being buried underground. It was the silence, you see. That place was never silent, not even at night. There were thousands of specimens in the room, and the other 4 that were adjacent. Mice, rats, rhesus monkeys, zebrafish, you name it, we had it. It wasn't like we could pop down to the corner shop that we had to stock up on and somehow everything was just dead silent. Not a peep, squeak, or howl, or a gibber. The first time that I noticed it, I took stock of my surroundings and I tried to swallow my terror. The specimens weren't sleeping, at least not the rats. They were all wide-eyed, back pressed to their cages, and glaring at the glass observation cases that we used for testing. And the rats in turn were watching me, hind legs bunched ready to pounce, their pink ears upright and alert, and their slithering tails coiled around their rotund bodies. And in the end, I gave up pretending. I ran the test so quickly I dropped a bottle of iodine and I left it where it was rather than clean it up. I decided that I'd come in early the next day to sort it out. Anything, I told myself, anything was better than staying down there on my own. And when it came time to run a new condition, to take half the rats that had survived and stop their intake of the compound, I thought that it'd be good to see what happened. I was still naive enough to find all of this oh so slightly thrilling. The pulse-pounding terror that I felt was still just alien enough, and the thing seemed safe enough that I wanted to go ahead. I couldn't imagine just how. I figured that they'd die or go back to normal, right? They tore through themselves, and then the glass. And that's not an exaggeration. They tore through themselves first, and then, with limbs half severed and guts exposed, they moved into the glass and gored themselves, making a hole. We're still not entirely sure how they did it, but as soon as they were through, they made a beeline for the other rats. The one still on the drug, still unaffected. One of the technicians tried to interfere by pulling back just a few of the rats that broke away from the quivering sea of fiery bodies and started nipping at his heels. And by the time someone finally rigged up some liquid nitrogen to blast them with, they'd broken through their companions and soaked the walls in blood. And when it was over, we were left with one hell of an ice sculpture. The way that they'd obscured the glass with bloody smears meant that we never got a proper look at what was going on. But once the mists had cleared and all you could hear was the cracking of ice and flesh, we saw a mound of half-melted flesh. It was like a battle scene paused in time, except the mountain of gore took on a strange quality close to the center. We spotted rats with 3 eyes, 5 legs, 2 tails, and so on. It was like they had started to merge, like cell division in reverse. I remember we were arguing over whether to incinerate it. I was attempting to put forward the case for keeping it, arguing that we owed our employer results and that this was the most profound thing that we could offer them. Maybe they'd even up our funding. The others weren't having it, though, crying for me to just let them dump the whole thing in the fire. But I was dead set against it until, from behind, I had heard a quiet rustling. I looked back. We had spent hours staring at the thing and arguing with each other, and close to the very top you could see the frost receding. And where it had faded, the white fur bunched together, in impossible knots began to thaw. There was the faintest motion of a single claw flexing and scrabbling at the ice, as if making to break free. And I burned it. The others thought that it was a moral victory of some kind. Hell, even I felt a flush of righteousness as 3 of us hurled it into the searing heat. But I also knew that we didn't live in a fairy tale, and our employers would want to know what had happened. Maybe it would be because I was the guy who'd have to explain it to them, but I didn't think that they'd be too happy with what I had to say. And of course they weren't. Any hopes of a funding raise went right out the window. And I was told pretty much point blank that I'd lose my job if we didn't carry on with further tests. I asked if that meant more rats, and the answer made me feel like I was losing my mind. Oh no, they said. We're moving on to monkeys.
The man before me is unusual, only in that he is wearing sunglasses even in a darkened room. And unlike all other interviewees, he reached out to me to discuss his thoughts on the Kentworth compound and insisted that I hear his thoughts on the matter. He is wiry, but exudes a calm energy, amongst other things, and speaks calmly into the microphone.
You're smaller than I expected. Sorry. That was a little joke. It's just that I've heard of you. Have you heard of me? I'm something of a writer, and I don't know. Maybe Peter read him. Maybe Peter read my book, or maybe one of the others that it's called. I met him once. Bought a book off of his father. He was rude. I think that he thought that I was a tourist, someone passing through, looking for a bit of inspiration to write another cheap novel. I think that he was a little shit, truth be told, and I ignored the angry teenager until his father finally sent him out of the room and our business continued. If you had told me that he would go on to do what he did, I would have thought that it unlikely. Despite all this supposed power, Peter was just a little boy trying to reach his mother. She had been a strict Christian and met a mysterious end not long after her husband returned from a most peculiar overseas trip. I can bloody well imagine how she must have reacted to her first glimpse of his nocturnal activities. What I can't imagine is her going along with it. I think Peter figured that out too, and I think that he spent the rest of his life desperately trying to prove her right. But at the time, the power within those books is undeniable. Their mere existence pisses all over the notion of an Abrahamic God, or at least one who cares about us. And there, I think, lay the first seed of Peter Rowland's very strange activities. He wanted to find God, and he wanted to do it in a way that proved once and for all that his mother and father could have coexisted. But what do I know? I'm just a writer, an armchair psychologist. I can't help but wonder if you know that, though, or whether it might be necessary to afford a little context to the things that you see. Context is always good. Well, that was why Peter went looking for God. And what he found, of course, was an observer, someone who watches. Only Peter had never really thought too hard about philosophy, or the world, or the very essence of knowledge. It didn't occur to him that in the same way that we have the idea of something, let's say a chair, in our head, so too must this other thing learn to remember us. To be known is a very powerful thing. Some might say the very building blocks of our existence are made out of nothing more than neurons and molecules. We think nothing of it, looking at something and making a representation of it buried deep within our minds. If Peter had read his father's work a little more closely, he might have realized that there are some things that do not think in electricity, but rather in bubbling meat and hard physical matter. Whole universe is made of a single living thing whose mind works on the turning of planets and the dying of stars. A cosmic brain where everything thought it rendered not in abstract patterns or neural activity, but in actual, real, physical matter. And everything it sees, observes, knows, gets added to its mind, which of course means Peter is still alive, in a sense. You know we have this saying about how the dead live in our own memories. Well, depending on who's remembering you, that's not always a good thing. Especially not when your own memories and thoughts are part of a reality, and so you're just kind of spilling out everywhere. And that's not even getting onto the topic of the other things that are tucked away in the memory of the cosmic being. When Peter first burst the membrane between realities, I'd hazard a guess, more things poured out than was sucked in. That bit of land won't be right again for another 1,000,000 years by my estimate. Everything's a little thinner there now, and I'd bet some things are still very keen on reaching right on over and reliving the last party that they had. It's like sticking your hand through the bars of a lion cage. I guess the irony is that Peter went looking for God, but he wound up finding a pretty good substitute for the Christian notion of hell. Then again, he's also in a place where his own thoughts can be reality. I bet he gets off on that. Wouldn't surprise me if he just recreated the Kentworth compound with more underage girls and no money troubles. He really did strike me as that shallow. Although somehow I doubt he's having a ball over there. At least he has friends, right? And an ever-expanding list at that. They're unlikely to cross paths. Ah, right. Big place. Bigger than you can imagine. I suspect that's by design. We humans weren't meant to know everything. I guess that must make all this
The interviewee gestures to my body.
a bit of a trip. Can I ask you something? Do they know? Am I giving it away? Why do you even publish this? I guess it doesn't matter to you, does it? All that matters are the people read it because you only need a flicker of their attention to recognize them, and then... Got 'em. You can look anywhere, just as long as you know where it is that you want to look. I'm not hurting anyone. No. But I think most people would agree it's an eerie idea. Anyone you look at. I mean, am I being remade right now over there? In your world? Well, I guess time isn't linear for you, is it? What was it I read? It expands over outwards like the stars in the sky. So in a sense, your idea of Peter predated the real, actual Peter. Apples and oranges. Well, I suppose the upside of it is that I'm sort of immortal now, aren't I? There'll always be an exact physical copy of me over there, living, breathing, existing. It's just a little uncomfortable to imagine what exactly that must be like. And everyone else. And anyone who hears this. Be like asking you to unremember a chair you just looked at. Everyone who is made aware of me is in turn brought to my attention. Remarkable. Absolutely remarkable. Are you going to go for the whole world or just a nice collection? I haven't actually thought about it. I've certainly enjoyed the observation of people up close, just as I have enjoyed watching the people who listen to the transcripts. Well, you have all the time in the world to decide. Yes. I suppose I do. I don't suppose while I've got you here you have anything to do with my own little predicament, do you? No. That was entirely your own doing. Do you have anything else to add to your testimony? I am, after all, meant to be doing the observing. No, that's fair enough. I understand. I appreciate you speaking to me like this. It's been a long journey getting here. I know. Right. Of course you do. You have created an atom-perfect replica of my own brain. And, in fact, you created it before I was born. Try not to think about it. I could tell you the same thing. I guess if I do have anything to add, it's that you should know Peter Rollins was a nasty piece of work, but his followers were all just down on their luck. I'm not an overly compassionate fellow, but I'd like to think that I'm not at the mercy of whatever else lurks in the literal corridors of your mind. I'd like to think that if they are burning, that somehow Peter's fire is a little bit hotter than everyone else's. Because I know what some of those rites involve. I also know the kind of pain that you have to inflict on a person to learn what he learned, and well, he really does deserve it.